In the words of Bertolt Brecht, in the dark times, will there also be singing? Yes, there will also be singing about the dark times. A very good evening to everyone present here. I, Mario Hahn, on behalf of Rhetorica, the Literary Society of the Department of English and Modern European Languages, University of Lucknow, welcome you all to this webinar titled Understanding Theatre, Multiple Possibilities. Theatre is one genre of literature which captures the attention of all the literary enthusiasts alike on account of its overarching quality of expressing the human emotions so succinctly. In such challenging times, when the entire world order is wrecked and effortless breathing seems to be a luxury, any attempt to take a step forward for doing something worthwhile upholds the true spirit of life that the show must go on. Today in our midst, we have three promising scholars of literature eager to share their literary insights on different forms, types, and aspects of theatre, ranging from the Brechtian theatre to the theatre of oppressed. We are delighted to host this congregation of listeners, and we hope that this little attempt of our department would reap fruitful benefits for all the interested learners of theatre and performing arts present here. Thank you. I would now like to invite Professor Rano Unyal, the head of the Department of English and Modern European Languages, University of Lucknow, to give a welcome address to the audience. Ma'am.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Department of English and Modern European Languages, University of Lucknow, I welcome all of you to a webinar organized by Rhetorica Literary Society, a society that encourages students of the department to read, write, recite, and review multiple aspects of life and literature. We hope that today's webinar, Understanding Theatre, Multiple Possibilities, will give a snapshot of the complexities inherent in modern theatre. Our speakers will look at the seismic shifts in theatre and how a variety of formal experimentation and theatrical practices have led to the growth of theatre in the 20th and the early 21st century. I welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So the speakers for the evening are Dr. Jasmeet Singh, Rohit Yadav, and Rupam Mishra. The first presentation would be made by Dr. Jasmeet Singh. Dr. Jasmeet completed his PhD from the Department of English and Modern European Languages, University of Lucknow, and is currently working as a lecturer of English at Rishi Bankim Chandra College for Women, Nehati, West Bengal. The title of his presentation is Brecht, Making Theatre Politically. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Maria. Good evening, respected teachers and friends. I would like to share my screen. Kindly, if I can, please enable me to do that.
Yes, sir.
Is the screen visible?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay. So good evening once again to my respected teachers and friends. My topic for today's presentation is Brecht, Making Theatre Politically. I am Dr. Jasmeet Singh from Rishi Bankim Chandra College for Women, Nehati, it's in West Bengal. So, pardon me, I suppose there is some technical glitch.
No, please continue, Jasmeet, we can hear you.
No, ma'am, the presentation has stopped. One sec. Fine. Okay. So we will be starting our presentation with the theoretical work of Bertolt Brecht. In fact, Bertolt Brecht wrote a particular book called Short Organum for Theatre. Now, this was written in 1948 and published in the year 1949. The book opens with a prologue that announces that it is concerned with theatre for a scientific age. It is made up of 77 short-numbered sections. Later, 10 more appendices were added to it. We all know that Brecht was influenced by Marxism, and there are certain writers who wanted to split Brecht's art from his politics, and this was not the right method to approach Brecht. In fact, one of the most famous writers to do this was Martin Esslin, who wrote a book where he kind of attempted to split Brechtian art from his politics. He was influenced by Marxism, and we cannot take away politics from his theater. In section 19, Brecht uses the phrase "a new science," which is his first allusion to Marxism in the text. In section 45, he is more overt when he associates the new social science with materialist dialectics. The most interesting aspect of the short organum is, in the 77 sections that we have, though Brecht is inspired by Marxism and its ideas, though he considered Marxism as a way of looking at the world through the philosophical term dialectics, he never for once mentions Marxism by name in short organum. You will not find a reference to the word Marxism in his short organum, though he is influenced by it. This serves two functions, I suppose. The first function that it serves is his readers might be averse to the term. I suppose some of us might not be comfortable with the term Marxism or leftist or communism. And the second reason was his Marxism was neither dogmatic nor orthodox. He wanted to show his audience that his Marxism, the concept of Marxism that he was working upon, is not something that is fixed or constant. It is something that is moving along with society, which is evolving along with society. So these are the two reasons which I suppose are the main reasons why he does not mention Marxism in his book. The next question that naturally arises is, why Marxism? The first reason is he uses Marxism because Marxism addresses inequalities in society. And not only that, it proposes ways of overcoming them. It provides you solutions. Okay, so it addresses inequalities as well as proposes ways of overcoming them. And the second point is, Marxism is not based on reforming an already flawed system. Okay, one that exists in society, the capitalism. It is not based on reforming it, because capitalism is something that cannot be changed. It has to be destroyed completely. So they want to fashion a new and a better society, that is socialism. And the third reason why he chooses Marxism is the use of dialectics. Now, what is dialectics? The term actually comes from Hegel. Though there is a difference between Hegelian dialectics and Brechtian dialectics, while Hegel emphasizes on idea as the source of dialectics, Brecht, on the other hand, is interested in materialism, the materialistic aspect. So what is dialectics? A mechanism that accounts for why things change in history and society. Dialectics comprises three parts. It has a thesis, it has an antithesis, and it has a synthesis. Now, the relationship between the thesis and an antithesis is one of contradiction. And when the contradiction becomes too great, elements of thesis and elements of antithesis form a new entity, the synthesis. So thesis is one idea, you have an antithesis, the opposing idea, and then we come to the synthesis. To give you an example of dialectics, French Revolution can be seen as an example of dialectics. In order to understand dialectics, I suppose French Revolution is one of a good example to explain it. France, as we know, was ruled by aristocracy before 1789, before the French Revolution takes place. Over time, a new social group emerges, that is the middle class. And this is aristocracy's antithesis. So we have a thesis in aristocracy. We have a new middle class, which is the antithesis, and the clash between the two. As I told you earlier, there is a relationship of contradiction between thesis and an antithesis. It is somewhat like a mother-in-law and a sister-in-law in some cases, pardon me. So there is a clash between those who were born to positions of power, that is aristocracy, and those who have worked their way up but have very little say in the running of France. So the middle class that has emerged before 1789, it has money, it has resources, but it does not possess power. So it comes in conflict with aristocracy. And that results in the French Revolution. So itself and the new order that follows. And yet history does not stop here, because the dialectic never stops. The society is completely evolving. So you have a thesis, you have an antithesis, you have a synthesis, and now this synthesis becomes the new thesis, because society is continually evolving. So you cannot stop. There is no full stop to the development or evolution of this particular society. So the dialectic continues. So you have a thesis, you have an antithesis, you have a synthesis. This synthesis becomes the new thesis. Then you again will have a new antithesis and again a synthesis. And this is how society prospers, evolves. So history does not stop here, because the dialectic never stops. And the dialectical view of human identity suggests that we are in a constant dialogue with our surroundings. Why dialectics? Why does Brecht use dialectics? The dialectical account of history and individuals is based on the world of instability. As I told you, the society is completely evolving. It is neither fixed nor constant. So we live in a world of instability. Nothing is ever fixed. And this idea can become political. If we find ourselves in a society that is oppressive or unjust, there will be ways to change it. We are living in pandemic times. Sometimes we become depressed, frustrated. But Brechtian theater shows us that there are always ways to change it. Dialectics always gives us hope, despite appearances to the contrary. Now, remember, dialectics do not promise a happy ending. In fact, as I told you earlier, the society is completely evolving. The dialectics does not stop. So the concept of ending itself is undialectical. A happy ending to दूर की बात है. Happy ending तो हो ही नहीं सकती. Ending ही नहीं हो सकती dialectics की. The third point why dialectics is used is it offers hope. It's like waiting for Godot. We are all waiting for something to happen. The synthesis, something good might happen. तो एक आशा है, एक hope है कि कुछ अच्छा होगा. Dialectics is not predictable, but the prospect of change is something that offers hope. And there was this Greek philosopher by the name of Heraclitus who once very famously said, and it sums up what dialectics is, one can never put one's foot into the same stream twice. एक नदी के पानी में आप एक बार पांव डालते हैं, जब दूसरी बार पांव डालते हैं तो वो पानी तो आगे निकल गया है. तो सोसाइटी तो कंप्लीटली इवॉल्व हो रहा है. One can never put one's foot into the same stream twice. What is Brecht trying to teach us? Brecht does not moralize. He does not really offer answers to the question his plays pose. He is in fact inviting us to think beyond the individual. Remember, we as individuals are not interesting or exciting to Brecht. For a Brechtian play, we need to think beyond the individual, because as an individual, we are all different creatures. We all have different individualities. We have different natures, different way of speaking. But beyond the individual, the human being as a whole, the concerns of the human being are the same: roti, kapda, and makan. So he is inviting us to think beyond the individual and to consider the individual's place in the greater social scheme of things. He wants to teach the audience to think dialectically. He wants his spectators to be surprised by what they see on stage. Spectators are expected to be active when they process the material on stage. Usually what happens is, dramas tend to focus their attention on characters. We tend to focus on characters, but Brecht, on the contrary, is interested not in characters. He is more interested in the specific situations that inform, affect, and transform characters. It is the situation, the specific situation that a particular figure or actor faces that shapes his character. What I am today, I am because of the situations, the way the situations have actually controlled my behavior towards them. Okay, so the situations are more important to Brecht than characters, because the situations actually shape a particular character. In a dialectical world, characters do not exist outside society, but are very much a part of it. The actions of the characters are dependent on their material context. And the word material or materialism has been used earlier while discussing dialectics. To give you an example of Hamlet, for example, there is this very mesmerizing dilemma that Hamlet has, to be or not to be. Brecht views Hamlet's dilemma as one produced by history and social context. Old Hamlet, I mean King Hamlet, who is the father of Prince Hamlet, he represents the old feudal order that had its own moral code based on social hierarchy. So old Hamlet represents the old feudal order. Claudius, the new king of Denmark, represents the new social order that values individual deeds over collective ones and is a self-made man. Claudius is a self-made man. He has become king not through tradition. Macbeth becomes king not through tradition, but his own criminal activity. Both Hamlet and Claudius stand for the new emphasis on individuals' reason, but in different ways. Claudius violates the old order by murdering his brother for personal gain. Hamlet applies reason by resisting his father's call for revenge and the old ways of doing things. Hamlet finds himself swinging between the old order and the new order because the concept of revenge that is there in the old order, which is represented by his father, is a different concept from the one that is there in the new order. So the dilemma of Hamlet that we have, to kill or not to kill, to be or not to be, I think the specific situation, Hamlet's position in society and history actually shapes his decision. His dilemma is actually, so Hamlet is no longer a personal tragedy. It is one brought about by Hamlet's place in history because he is confronted by two very different ways of dealing with revenge, the old order of revenge and the new order of revenge. And this is where he is kind of swinging between the two pendulums. Coming to Wolfram-Dung's effect. What is Wolfram-Dung's effect? It is about making the familiar strange. Obviously, it is taken from Russian formalism. Now, making the familiar strange, when I say that, just imagine when we walk down the street, no one notices us. हम लोग जब रास्ते पे चलते हैं तो कोई हमें देखता भी नहीं है, हम लोग भी नहीं देखते by the way. But when we have earbuds in our ears and we are listening to music and walking down the street, the same familiar walking movements, when kind of used with that particular rhythm, when I walk in rhythm, जब मैं ताल पे चलता हूँ, rhythm पे चलता हूँ, तो the same walking movement becomes dance. So the familiar becomes strange. अब मैं जब म्यूजिक सुन के नाच रहा हूं, नाच नहीं रहा हूं, मेरे वॉकिंग मूवमेंट्स रिदम पे चल रहे हैं, तो लोग मेरी तरफ देखते हैं कि ये कौन सा नमूना है जो रास्ते पे चल रहा है. So I am making the familiar strange. The second point is, it is about questioning things we may take for granted. It has a political thrust. It is not only about calling old assumptions into question, but creating a new understanding. Suppose if you have read Tughlaq by Girish Kannad. Tughlaq by Girish Kannad is about that particular king called Tughlaq. It is a kind of an old story taken from history. But don't you think if you read that particular text, you will come to a new understanding of the Nehruvian era, the contemporary era, when Nehru was the Prime Minister of India. So it is not only about calling old assumptions into question, but creating a new understanding altogether. The Wolfram-Dung's effect does not distance the audience from the play. It actually affects a distance from familiar conceptualization. जो अभी तक लगता था अरे ये तो normal है. It actually affects a distance from that particular familiar conceptualization. Brecht's plays are actually a retelling of reality rather than a mere representation. His realism is not concerned with what appears to be happening, but what is really happening. So what is really happening in society is what his realism is all about. And remember, when we talk about realism as a style, expressionism as a style, naturalism as a style, remember, this is not a style. This is actually a stance. Realism is a stance, a positioning of oneself towards reality. Naturalism is a stance, a positioning of oneself towards reality. आप coin को किस तरफ से देखते हैं? Head की तरफ से देख रहे हैं या tail की तरफ से? It is your positioning. Rather than being a style, it is your stance of looking at reality. Now, making theater politically, political theater, the familiar concept is political theater means theater with political content. जिसमें political content होता है वही political theater है. Brecht was not making political theater as Utpal Dutt was, as Safdar Hashmi was, as Badul Shorkar was. His is not a political theater. He was making theater politically. Now, in order to understand this, we need to understand the definition of politics. According to Lenin, the famous Marxist revolutionary, he defines politics as who does what to whom and for what reason. Whenever we read a particular play, we need to answer this question. And if we find an answer to this particular question from the play itself, that means politics is ingrained in that particular text. This question is consequently about power, law, ethics, economics, and politics is the overarching term that runs through all of them. Brecht wants to show his audience that even an apolitical play has certain ideologies, the undercurrent of politics inherent in it, because nothing is apolitical. Even personal is politics. The relationship between a father and mother is political. The relationship between a husband and wife is political. The personal is political. Nothing is apolitical. So Brecht wants his audience to realize that there are political undercurrents even in an unpolitical of situations. And the most interesting part of this is in Brechtian theater, two lovers kissing each other also becomes political, because it goes to show the kind of social class that they come from and the role of gender within it. Obviously, you cannot negate desire. Desire is definitely a part of it. But then social class and role of gender, you cannot negate social class and role of gender in it.
Hello.
Jasmeet Bhaiya, we cannot hear you.
However, that representation is never neutral. Representation is never neutral. I suppose my voice is audible. Is my voice audible?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Actually, I had a power cut. Yes. Okay. So representation is never neutral. To Brecht, a figure is something that is unfixed. If you go by the definition of a figure, you will find that Oxford Dictionary defines figure as something that is unfixed and something that is flexible. And if you look into the definition of a character, you will find that character is something that is constant, definite, and has persistent qualities. Okay? A figure is not a figure in isolation, but he or she is what he or she is in relation to someone else. Now, take, for example, Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth appears very strong in Act 1, Act 2. Till Act 3, she is very strong. She supports her husband in the banquet scene also, by the way. But in Act 5, we find that Lady Macbeth there is a change that has come about in Lady Macbeth. She is suffering from somnambulism. So what can I say? That Lady Macbeth, according to Brecht, is not a character, because going by the definition of a character is something that is definite and is constant and has persistent qualities. But a figure is something that is unfixed and flexible. So Lady Macbeth is actually a figure and not a character, because according to Brecht, figures change. They are flexible. Characters do not change. So Brecht is not concerned with the psychology of a character. Coming to the point, is Brecht relevant today? I suppose I can share one of my experiences, since I am doing a PGCET course from IFLU, Hyderabad, and I am going through the CLT methodology, the communicative language teaching methodology, where we find that in the 1970s and 80s, the focus in teaching methodology has been the learners and the learning. The learners and the learning becomes very important in the communicative language teaching methodology. So one of the best lessons to learn from a Brechtian theater is that he positioned his audience differently. He considered his audience to be guests instead of witness. So somewhere down the line, I feel that the communicative language teaching methodology that we have today, that evolved around 70s and 80s, I suppose it also focuses on students. They see student as an active force in class. What is important in class is not hearing. What is important is comprehending. So comprehension becomes very important. It is only through comprehension of a particular topic that the learner can actually ask me questions, or the learner can actually learn. So Brecht wanted his audience to be guest, wanted his audience to participate, wanted his audience to be active rather than passive. So the CLT method, somewhere down the line, I suppose, derives from these things also, particularly the theater of oppress too, as Rupam will be talking about, where Augusto Boal talks about spec actors. So students in classroom teaching should also become like those spec actors acting in class. His audience is referred to as guest instead of witness. Epic theater offers a unique and challenging way of revisiting old stories. And one of the best part of this is the ability to juxtapose postmodern with ancient Greek, Shakespeare, or other classical styles. And the most important aspect is Brecht calls his theater non-Aristotelian. He takes certain elements from Aristotle. While Aristotelian theater focuses on catharsis, Brecht focuses on anagnorisis. Brecht's focus is on recognition and realization. He wants his audience to think and think dialectically. And when they will think dialectically, that is the moment that will bring about a peripeteia or a reversal, a change in society. So this change is related to anagnorisis. So Brechtian theater is about making you think. It will not provide you answers. You have to think dialectically, and that will bring about a reversal or a change in society. Okay, though the point is he does not negate catharsis. He does not negate emotions. Emotions are important. But for Brecht, more important than emotion or catharsis is anagnorisis or peripeteia. With this, I would like to end my PPT, Unhappy the Land That Is in Need of Heroes by Bertolt Brecht. Thank you, ma'am, for giving me this opportunity to speak here. I end my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jasmeet Singh, for laying down in simple yet wholesome points the true essence of Brechtian theatre. I would request the audience to kindly post their questions, if any, in the chat box, which they would like to ask the speakers. Thank you. Now I would like to invite Rohit Yadav to make his presentation. Rohit is currently working as a PhD research scholar at the department under the supervision of Dr. R.B. Sharma. The title of his presentation today is Modern Indian Theatre. Over to you, Rohit Yadav.
So I would like to share my slide. Is it visible?
Yes, it's visible. Yes.
Okay. So thank you, ma'am, for this opportunity. And just let me start my slideshow. Right. So thank you, ma'am, for the opportunity. My topic is modern Indian drama. And before going to modern Indian drama, it's important to discuss about the concept that is modernism itself. So in the simplest terms, modernism reflects a shift from the traditional tradition, and break away from the past, or search for new forms of expression. It meant doing away with outdated past at times and embracing a belief in progress. It applies to spheres of art, philosophy, religion, and literature. Now, in literature, the movement involved experimentation with new forms and expressions. So, as to bring changes in culture in society and the transition into 20th century. Main techniques in literature concentrate on stream of consciousness and intertextuality and others. Now, the famous line which was given by Ezra Pound, the poet, make it new, symbolizes the forward-thinking approach and characteristic of modernism. Now, modernist writers and musicians made reference to past works by employing techniques like rewriting or revision or parody or going into the consciousness. Now, in the West, modernism emerged as an outcome of World War I, which changed the philosophical, social, and economic grounding of people with a hope of new approach to life. However, in Indian context, it's not in the same way that modernism has been approached. And especially in theater, I'm talking about. Now, historicization of theater has its own complexities in Indian theater because of its multilingualism, diversity, and regionalism. If one attempts to trace the development of Indian theater or the journey through which it has evolved, and it has evolved, and being in a state that it is in contemporary times, is similar to search the evolution of India as a nation. It is difficult to associate concepts such as post-coloniality and modernity to Indian theater, drama, and performance, while creating the historiography of Indian theater. There have been several experiments in Indian theater from 1950s onward in dozens of languages, evolving through traditions in different genre and regional influences, along with influences and inspirations from the Western theatrical conventions and forms. Though playwrights and theater practitioners in post-colonial Indian theater have not hesitated to use Western conventions, but have also shown a desperate attempt to abandon the colonial practice and recuperated the classical, traditional, and folk practices of pre-colonial Indian performance and theater. By locating their theater in plurality of language, location, and regionalism, post-colonial Indian theater has attempted to blur the boundaries of East and West, past and present, one region to another region, one language to another language, and has created its identity, which looks at the future, or what we call as modern. There have been several forms and styles in which Indian theater has evolved, assimilating everything that has been associated with it in the past and rejecting everything which doesn't fit in the progressive and modern creation of India as a nation. Now, theater scholars and researchers have disagreement and conflict in defining modernity of Indian theater, as different perceptions and understanding has placed modern Indian theater in different time periods. So historians influenced by Orientalism are driven by Western historiography, claim modern period to start from the advent of Britishers to present time, and attribute Sanskrit theater to shape the modern theater and reflect upon the development of Indian theater. So the practitioners or the historians who are driven by Orientalism are always concentrating into the Sanskrit theater, and meanwhile negating or rejecting the folk tradition, which was very prevalent from 1000 BC to contemporary times. Now, the post-colonial reading of modern Indian drama traces modernity in Indian stage after independence. They believe that the multilingual and diverse regional and cultural theater of India, which an attempt to create identity of Indianness by decolonizing itself from the imperial influences, returns to pre-colonial history and mythology to create modern Indian theater. So if you look at the plays of Girish Karnad, and I will talk about that in the meanwhile. The traditionalist attempt, now there are traditionalists who believe that Indian theater is located, or the modernity of Indian theater is located in the roots. And they relocate their modern tendencies in Bharat Muni's Natya Shastra and Sanskrit theater. Uh, After in this institutionalization of Indian art and culture through formation of Sangeet Nat Academy, National School of Drama, and Bharatindu Nat Academy, this tendency developed further. I will attempt to give you a brief understanding of evolution of all three kinds of modern theater which evolved, and there's a lot of controversy in which is actually the exact modern theater of India, and conclude with the notion of modern Indian theater as a collective self-consciousness and assimilation of every performative art form which prevailed on this land of the subcontinent. So it's like combination, and I will talk about that in some time. Now, first of all, I will talk about the initial part of modern theater, where it is said that Indian theater originates and starts from 18th century. So the historiography of pre-colonial Indian subcontinent theater is traced through colonial encounter, where British scholars, colonial missionaries, and colonial scholars wrote about Indian theater and culture, and under the influence of Orientalism, and attempting to stereotype the natives. Now, early histories of Indian theater is reflected through the works of Horace Hayman Wilson, 3-volume selected specimens of the Theatre of the Hindus, published in 1827 and in Calcutta. And another work is Sylvain Levi, 2-volume, The Indian Theatre. So these works equated Indian theatre directly to classical Sanskrit theatre of dance, music, and performance, and ultimately rejected the multilingual and regional folk nature of Indian theatre. The colonial historiography of Indian theatre divides Indian theatre into Western chronological categories of ancient, medieval, and modern, and places modern from advent of Britishers in 18th century to present. The early Indologists, colonial missionaries, and historians trace tradition of Indian theatre in Sanskrit text of Bharat Muni's Natya Shastra, an ancient text on dramaturgy, which provided detailed and comprehensive understanding of theoretical and practical aspects of performing art. It covered each aspect of performance, from acting to dancing to music and prosody, and did not limit there. It actually talks about the size and shapes of the playhouses, the costumes, the makeup, the theories of emotions, and sentiments. So Natya Shastra is a very prescriptive text and very important text in understanding Indian theatre, which has laid norms, rules, and regulations of Sanskrit performances. But in effort to locate Indian theatre strictly in Sanskrit theatre, British colonial scholars and historians harmed the multilingualism of Indian tradition. It is believed by post-colonial scholars such as Aparna Dharwedkar that in attempt to translate Kalidasa's Abhigyan Shakuntalam, which was published in Calcutta in 1789, William Jones, a missionary scholar with Oriental perspectives, negated or rejected the other language used by the playwright, such as Sarasemi, Maharashtri, Magadhi, which were integral part of the play, and projected the text as a pure Sanskrit text. Similar issues were traced and found with other Sanskrit texts as well. In attempt to create Indianness or Indianness in Indian theatre, historians such as Hemendra Das Gupta, who wrote 4 volumes by the name Indian Stage, a historical book, which was published again in Calcutta in between 1944 to 1946. And Ramanlal Kanhaiyal Yajnik, who wrote Indian Theatre, followed this whole imperialist tradition of Western scholars and did not acknowledge the folk or regional or dialectical performances as theatre, and emphasized on Sanskrit theatre as Indian theatre. With advent of East India Company, which settled in provincial cities of Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay, set up theatre and introduced British drama on Indian subcontinent, and from where some scholars believe that modern Indian theatre starts. And they built British style and structured theatres in Calcutta. The Calcutta theatre was built in 1775. Later on, Chaurangi theatre was built in 1813. And then afterwards, Sanssouci theatre was built in place of Chaurangi theatre in 1839. Now, this led to the whole involvement of British theatre and British culture and influence of British culture on Indian culture. Now, English in context of performance and drama, I'm talking about. English plays were performed which did not allow common masses. These theatre companies which were performing plays in these theatre halls were patronized by British officials and native elites. The native elites were comprised of Parsi community who were closely associated with colonial rules due to their business and English education. And they later on they owned several theatre companies and contributed in creating commercial theatre. So it was under British rule in the hands of Parsis that theatre became commercialized and had ticketed shows. So that was a big achievement for theatre because it was transforming into a commercial thing. Now, so it was the 19th century, theatre became a form of mass entertainment in Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras, and touring companies were also created by Parsi theatre. And later on, theatre also became popular in schools and colleges. So meanwhile, Bengali theatre also emerged as a prominent theatre, which was actually there. And one very famous play, which was Dinabandhu Mitra's, Dinabandhu Mitra's Neel Darpan, which was an attack on the exploitative British indigo planters, was actually banned, and indigo plantation at large level led to poverty and famine and widespread disease to the farmers of the natives. So it was showcasing that atrocities and pain and sorrow of the farmers and the brutality which Britishers were doing. So the play led to the passing of Dramatic Performance Act in 1876 to suppress the seditious and patriotic tendencies in performing art. And this led to the whole political theatre and development of political theatre. Now, so the theatre in from 18th century to 20th century revolves around from British theatre to Parsi theatre, and then development of Bengali theatre and regional theatres also taking place. But political theatre is also becoming very important aspect of Indian tradition, and which will lead to development of Indian people's theatre later on. So, theatre scholar Anand Lal argues that Rabindranath Tagore played an influential role in modern Indian theatre. Not only through imaginative stagecraft modeled on Sanskrit aesthetics, but his plays were modern themes such as themes of female sexuality, the orthodoxies of the Hinduism, untouchability, and it was Rabindranath Tagore's productions where women performers were brought on stage, which was again a very revolutionary step in development of Indian theatre. So then there's a lot of talk about Parsi theatre and how Parsi theatre is claimed to be one of the modern Indian theatres. Anuradha Kapoor and Catherine Hansen, theatre scholars, they actually believe that the theatre companies under the control of Parsi management had actors, writers, musicians, and painters from Muslims, Hindus, Anglo-Indians, and Baghdadi Jews community. So Catherine Hansen, in his essay, Languages of Stage, Linguistic Pluralism, and Community Formation in the 19th century Parsi theatre, claims that the Parsi theatre stood for multilingualism and its influence was beyond Parsi community. And that's why Hansen argues that because Parsi theatre was not only performing in English, but also in Hindi and Urdu and Gujarati. So it was, and actors and playwrights and painters were from different communities. So it was more of a secular kind of formation which was taking place in Indian theatre at that time. Now, Hansen argues that Parsi theatre was spread across a wide range of languages and regions. The plays were written and performed in Gujarati, Urdu, and English. Parsi theatre, in terms of true actor, writers, had a pluralistic and secular nature with multiple languages, ethnicities, religion. So Parsi theatre became very important. But and they hold many important theatre troupes and theatre groups, such as Gaiety, Elphinstone, Victoria and Alfred theatre troupes in Bombay, and produced plays like Rustam and Jaboli and Sohrab. Parsi theatre also, okay, all right. So Parsi theatre also, produced productions of Shakespeare and plays like Taming of Shrew, Merchant of Venice, Two Gentlemen of Verona, Timon of Athens, which were translated in Gujarati. So Parsi theatre, and it also took not only the Western conventions, but also were influenced by folk forms such as Bhavai, Lavani, ballads in Gujarat, other folk forms as ghazals in Persian, and Gujarati and Urdu songs from Bhakti movement and Thumri. So they brought them together and created their own theatre. So that is very important understanding of Parsi theatre and how it emerged as a very prominent theatre in pre-independence Indian theatre. Now, decline of Parsi and English theatre was due to two reasons. One was this whole revolt of 1857. After that, the whole idea of generation of patriotism and national movement and fighting for freedom struggle, which led to the decline of this theatre. And the another kind of post-modern theatre is seen in the context of post-colonial reading of Indian theatre. Now, it is obscure to confine post-independence Indian theatre into concepts such as modern because of its plurality of languages again, and its location and representational conventions. Indian theatre appears to be an arena in which historical boundaries have become radically permeable. So it's very difficult to confine them into historical divisions or divisions on certain basis. So that's very difficult. There have been a lot of works which have been written by with the post-colonial reading from the Western post-colonial scholars also. But the thing is, they have confined it to one narrow understanding. Either they have understood or try to understand Indian theatre in context of their form or region or language. So the holistic understanding of Indian theatre was not possible. And that's why post-colonial scholars and thinkers felt that it's very difficult to confine or bring Indian theatre and its elements together in a research. So there are a lot of works like Richard Schechner has worked, and he has come up with has worked on Ram Leela, and Peter Brooks has worked with Mahabharata and Ramayana. So there have been a lot of works by many writers. Stoller Miller has written the miracle plays of Mathura, and there are many others who have worked. But they all believe that it's very difficult to understand holistically Indian theatre because of its multilingualism, regionalism, and locations. So that is one thing which has been talked about. Now, with the emergence of nationalistic feeling, and there was another kind of very important and one thing very interesting which we see, that in an attempt to decolonize theatre, there was always a slogan of empire writes back. So many of the countries where theatre was performed and was written in the language of the imperials and showcasing their own culture, India was not rejecting or outrightly rejecting colonial elements. Indian theatre was accepting it. And Indian theatre has constantly accepted it after independence, whether it is theatre of Habib Tanveer or it is theatre of Girish Karnad or Badal Sarkar or Vijay Tendulkar. They all have amalgamated and brought their theatrical dramaturgy by combining Western conventions and Indian folk tradition. So another very important development was the creation of IPTA, Indian People's Theatre Association, in 1943, which was again created through Progressive Writers Association, and they believed in the idea of Progressive Writers Association, and their idea was to go to connect with the masses and take their social issues and speak about their social issues. So the gradual model of theater which was created through IPTA was to bring regional folk forms on the mainstream, on in the urban performance areas. So that was one achievement which happened, and theater artists associated with IPTA have worked upon. And IPTA, the theater artists who were working under IPTA were very much influenced by Bertolt Brecht. Now, because there were many reasons, because it was Brecht which they were following, because Brecht gave them a scope of bringing social issues on the mainstream. It was Brecht who was able to give them Brecht's epic theater, which was able to provide them that space where they can experiment with the folk art forms and create a structure. So whether it's Habib Tanveer or whether it's Safdar Hashmi later on, or whether it is other playwrights, they have constantly felt a need for Brechtian structure of epic theater and its alienation effect because their IPTA's theater was all about to teach people. So that was an intent through which this theater was created. So the contribution of socially committed theater implemented by IPTA which support folk theater from moving a form which was limited to a village and community to cities and national and international platforms. The Indian People's Theatre was established by the writers and intellectuals connected with Progressive Writers Association, as I said. So that was an interesting part. And then IPTA also, the social commitment of IPTA to create social communication with masses and to bring social change through through their plays and through engaging masses on social issues finds it parallel to Brechtian epic theater. So they worked in close cooperations with proletariats and engaged with trade unions and Kisan Sabhas, and this led to the rejection of bourgeois theater and theme in India. Brecht and IPTA propagate similar aspects, like they believe in reason over emotion, plot over character, issue over psychology, driven by idea of Marxist economy. The modern Indian theatre was scientific theatre for industrial age under the hands of IPTA. Now, later on, again, this trend moved on. And if you look at the whole idea of modernity in the theatre artist, playwrights, especially the big four playwrights of India, Badal Sarkar or Girish Karnad or Vijay Tendulkar or Mohan Rakesh, we can see that they are at structural level playing with the Western conventions and trying to bring in tools and techniques from the folk form, but they're going back to their history and mythology to get the content. And to create that whole identity of India. So if you look at Girish Karnad, the first play he's writing is Yayati, which is again a mythological story. On the other hand, second play he's writing is Tughlaq, which is again from medieval history of India. Now, and so on, he moves ahead. Now, then you can see Dharamveer Bharti, a very important playwright and theatre director. His plays, he also writes a play which he takes from Andha Yug, which is again a scene from Mahabharata. And similarly, another very important practitioner of Indian theatre, who is Ratan Thiem, who is trying to bring in his Manipuri folk form and writing a play and performing it known as Chakravyuh. And even Mohan Rakesh, his play Lehro Ke Rajans, which is talking about Buddhism, spiritualism, and materialism. And even Ashar Ke Ek Din, which is again taking it back to the history. So there has been a constant engagement of of Eastern folk form, Sanskrit tradition, British influences, and Western influences on Indian theatre. Now, another moment, and with this I will finish, another moment where the idea of modern Indian theatre erupted was after the institutionalization of organizations such as Sangeet Natak Academy, Bhartindu Natak Academy, National School of Drama, and later on Suresh Avasthi, Mr. Suresh Avasthi actually organized two very important conferences in 1961 and 1971. In 1961, Suresh Avasthi called for this National Conference on Theatre, And in 1971, he brought a roundtable concerning issues to traditional theater. And afterwards, he wrote a research paper along with Richard Schechner, in which he talks about theater of roots. And he's talking about and claiming that the modern Indian theater resides in the roots. So let's go back to the roots. Let's go back to the Sanskrit theater. But and the kind of examples which he's giving in research paper, actually they themselves don't follow this idea of going back to the roots, where they are actually believing in the concept like what Erin Beamy in her book Theatre Roots talks about is hybrid theater, where Erin Beamy claims that Indian modern theater is a hybrid theater where it has amalgamated everything which it has experienced, from ancient Sanskrit theater to folk and regional theater to British and Western theater to the Marxist theater. So it has become evolved, and Indian theater is following the step of inclusiveness which India as a nation or culture has, where it has amalgamated and assimilated everything which it has experienced, and it has made it its own. So that's why it's very difficult to bifurcate and find out what actually or where to find modern Indian theater, because it's such diverse field, and such diverse in its multilingual capacity, in its regional capacity, in its locational capacity, and again it's give and take, which is happening in Indian theater, where they're also giving to the Western theater in the modern times, and they are always ready to accept from the Western or the modern Western art form. So that's why modern Indian theater is something which I also agree with what Erin Beamy says is kind of a hybrid theater, which is of everything. And I say it's a collective self-consciousness of all the art forms which prevail on this land in pre-colonial era, colonial era, and post-independence era. So with this, I will end my talk.
Thank you so much, Rohit, for such insightful observations regarding the modern Indian theatre. So the last speaker for the evening is Rupam Mishra. Rupam is currently working as a PhD scholar at the department under the supervision of Professor Ranu Unyal. The title of our presentation today is Theatre of the Oppressed, an Overview. Over to you, Rupam.
Thank you, Maria. I'll just start sharing my screen.
Yes.
So good evening, everyone. The topic for my presentation is Theatre of the Oppressed, an Overview. Theatre of the Oppressed came into being as a political response by Augusto Boal, who was a Brazilian playwright. And he started this practice way back in the 1950s. Now, the way he started this practice was first he developed a series of theaters which were of the participatory nature, and then he combined all of them to create what today is known by the name of the Theatre of the Oppressed. The aim for the creation of this theatre was to revolutionize theatre, to demarginalize the actors of color, and also to focus on the problems of the people of the country. So he was making a political attempt as he was trying to create this theatre. Augusto Boal, he was a Brazilian theatre practitioner, as I told you, and he was a core leftist, a radical leftist, so much so that he often got into trouble because of his leftist ideology. He was a member of the Communist Party of Brazil, and he was also the artistic director of Teatro Arena, which was way before he became involved with the Theatre of the Oppressed as a whole body. He directed a lot of classical plays, but his only problem with classical plays was that he was done with the way the European narrative was trying to be overpowered, and how the problems of the people of Brazil were ignored through the play. And he always thought that plays and theater should be a means for the people to realize their problems and also thereafter to come up with a solution. For his political ideas, as I told you, he was also imprisoned and exiled. Now, in 1972, he came up with his seminal book, which is known as The Theatre of the Oppressed. It was first published in 1972 in Spanish, and then later on it was translated into English in 1979. Something that is crucial about this book is the arsenal, which we are going to talk about later in the course of this presentation. Okay, so he said that the theater was a dithyrambic song, free people singing in the open air, the carnival, the feast. And he said this was divided by the ruling class. The ruling classes took over possession of the theater and built their dividing walls. First, they divided the people, separating actors from spectators, people who act and people who watch. Secondly, among the actors, they separated the protagonists from the masses. And Boal was strictly against this idea. Now, there are a few important points to this presentation. The first is the theatre of the oppressed is a post-dialectical form of theatre. When we talk post-dialectical, I mean Brecht was a dialectical theatre practitioner. Whatever came after Brecht is known as post-dialectical. Now, of course, as the name suggests, he rejected all the old patterns of theatre production and performance. His aim was to bring theatre to the masses, to the streets, to the villages where the nation lived and where the nation struggled. He decided and he aimed at freeing the theatrical practice from all the old forms and traditions. He decided to do away with the four walls of theatre. He decided to do away with the whole traditional setup of theatre and theatre production. And also we'll see as we move forward that he also decided to do away with the script, which used to be a crucial element in any theatrical production. He called Aristotle coercive. Now, this is a really important and interesting point. He's in his book, The Theatre of the Oppressed, he writes that Aristotle's idea of catharsis is rather coercive. And why does he say that? He says that the process, the basic factor for which a performance must be executed is so that people may, find a sense of what do you call? I mean, they may find it revolutionary. They may, find it as a means to overcome their own challenges. And when Aristotle says that that theater is cathartic in nature, and there's a hamartia, which automatically leads to the downfall of the main character or the protagonist, and the people who watch it, they are they have this sense of catharsis arising in them when the play reaches the climax. He says that with this idea, with this notion of theatrical performativity, people who watch the theater production, they are continuously in a loop which fails them. I mean, because of which they fail to see the real problems that lie. And they think, okay, something has happened, and this is his fatal flaw, and he meets a certain end. And because of this, they always fail to see the underlying problem and also to address them and form responses to them. He linked art to politics. He says that nothing is free of politics and even art. So, and art, according to him, should be was supposed to be a potent means for political action. The main reason for his theatrical interest and his entire journey was social reformation. Now, how did this journey go? Boal explored multiple themes and forms of theater. This was, like I said, way before he came up with the Theatre of the Oppressed. And, he had a collection of techniques, exercises, and games that he had devised for over the years of practice. He developed these into new practicing ways of theater. These theaters were known as newspaper theater, image theater, invisible theater, forum theater, legislative theater, analytical theater, and so forth. The purpose for this was that in the 1960s, Brazil saw many political upheavals, especially in the mid-1960s. The country decided to keep a check on communist activity. They censored all leftist ideas, and because of this, Bole was sort of forced to, find or develop new forms of or innovative forms of theater, so that, he could keep his voice going, or he could keep providing an outlet to the leftist voices. He aimed at countering and avoiding censorship and repression by the means of his new, or rather imaginative ways of theater that he was creating. He, of course, he created a very strong political voice, and the welfare of the masses was always at the center of his theatrical practice. He elaborated a theater technique as a method that anyone could perform simply by following the steps. Now, Bole said that since theater was something that belonged to the people, he did away with all the complexities that involved a theatrical production, and he came up with simple solutions to perform theater. First of them was newspaper theater. Now, with this, the basic idea was to demystify the ideological content. Whatever ideological content that was published in the newspaper, with the means of newspaper theater, Bole attempted to do away with all that mystification and bring it in clear form before the masses. The newspaper became the script and the prop, which is a very crucial point, because these were common people, which you'll see later. Okay. Now, the news articles were the basic plots that were used for performance, and whatever issues were taken, they were all very socially relevant. These plays were performed by common people, and the newspaper was read by these common people every morning, and they elaborated upon the scenes later on during the day, and they performed these scenes in the evening, so much so, and with such finesse that the police couldn't even find out about it, let alone punish them for being a leftist voice in the society. Improvisation was a major technique that that Bole used in the form of his theater production, and he with this he mocked the left censorship, because when the country was so keen on shutting all the leftist voices, he said there must be an outlet, and therefore he very quietly and smartly enveloped this into a normal evening conversation among people. And this is how the newspaper theater came into being. The headlines and the speeches which were there, the articles which were there, they became the speeches, and this garnered many responses from the fellow participants. And the discussion that took place, it was always improvised, and this gave birth to the improvised plot, which later would be known as the text, or of course the text of the play. And by the end of the theatrical performance, they would always aim at redefining the issues which were troubling them. Now, a turn of events took place as this was going on. Bole created Brecht's Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui, and in 1971, he was arrested by the Brazilian police. He was freed, but he was forced into exile, and he moved to Argentina with his family, and there he continued to practice his theater as a political response to the things that were going on in life. It is in Argentina that he created Invisible Theater. He was known for his subversive activities, and since he was a refugee, people always thought that he was always up to something, and he was consistently in a very dangerous situation. And he was also threatened by the militia, which was operating in Latin America, which was trying to shut the communist voices. And this is the reason why he devised Invisible Theater. And interesting enough, being invisible, it was performed in very open and public spaces like streets and in restaurants. You see into this image that there's this man who's kneeling down, and he's probably lifting up something, but this is not just a mere act of picking up something from the street that has fallen down, but this is something that will develop into a dialogue. Now, theatrical and fictive elements were very carefully concealed. These practitioners, these actors who would be a part of Invisible Theater, they would very cleverly disperse themselves among the common public, and they would pick up something, any idea or any social or political issue, and they would start commenting on it. And by the end of all, they would always come up with a solution, and they would make the common mass or public realize that there was something wrong with the way they were accepting things. And they were accepting things which were unjust. So this is how he kind of brought forth a revolution. He also came up with image theater. So he became a part of a literacy plan by the Peruvian government. And since there was a language barrier, so he decided, and he kept on mulling over as to how he could come up with a new and innovative way of theater. So he used the body of the actor as an image which could be modified and molded. So what he did was, one actor would play the sculptor, and he molded the others into various shapes and forms and images of his own liking, or whatever he thought was apt. And now, in turn, the others came to fore later on during the course of the play or the performance, and they would change these images to their own liking. Now, this may sound a little confusing, but it was not just images. When I say images, I mean responses in the context of social and political, atmosphere of the nation. And of course, because it was a dialogue-less, a morely a mimetic performance. So, it was very mechanical, and it was full of images, and it kept mirroring others. I mean, there was a lot of mirroring because, one would be formed into a sculptor, then, they would de-sculpt and form into another shape, so on and so forth. Now, pre-forum theater is not really a term, but I have used it for convenience, because this is a kind of theatrical practice that Bol engaged into way before he formed the forum theater or the theater of the oppressed. And here what he did was, he employed the technique of simultaneous dramaturgy. He called it, this is something he also uses in the TO, or the theater of the oppressed, as I say. Here the actors would perform short scenes, and they would depict aspects from the daily lives of people. And then the people were asked to give solutions, provide solutions to these problems which were existing in the actors' lives. And this is something, this interactive idea, which results in the simultaneous dramaturgy, and how audiences would continuously interrupt the show and, intervene and get up from their seats. And, in the middle of the show, they continue to say that, okay, this is wrong. And, this is how we can solve this. They would create a new plot line. They would continue to rewrite the original plot line, and in turn become the core dramaturges of the performed piece. There was another form of theater which he devised, which was known as the legislative theater. And this he did in order to give the voters an opportunity to voice their opinions. Now, the objective of this kind of theater was to open up a dialogue between the citizens and the government, or whatever institutional entities that existed. The regulation of the flow of power between both groups was always kept in check. And Bol called it transitive democracy. He said that it lay democracy and the delegate democracy. And it is similar to forum theater. How so? Because there is a response, and there's a window open for dialogue where the audience can comment upon things and provide suggestions. Now, this was basically used for whatever laws were passed. So if a law was supposed to be passed, then it would be staged, and the actors would be performing it, and they would often ask the spectators, who later became spect actors, as Dr. Jasmeet also earlier mentioned, and I will talk about it in a bit. These spect actors took onto the stage, and they expressed their opinions, which were also incorporated into the play. And it was very improvisational, and it was very, it didn't really have a plot. But this is how the plot continued to be created. And the only aim which Bol had in mind with this form of theater was to continue to provide a way for the masses to better themselves, continue to better themselves, and not remain marginalized. Analytical theater was another form of theater. Improvisation of a narrative chain started by one of the actors. So, one of the actors would start a chain of dialogues, and later the characters were broken down into various social roles, and the participants chose a physical object to symbolize each role. Now, this may not seem very easy to understand in the first read. Why so? So, what they would do is they would take any social or political condition, and they would take opposing bodies with opposing ideologies. And now, midway the narrative, it would be flipped. Somebody would be assigned a certain symbol, which was either that of being oppressed or that of the oppressor, and somehow during the course of the performance, they would flip it and change it. And by this, they would also aim at making the people see that not everybody is a cruel entity, or not all governing bodies are cruel and inhumane, but they would also humanize all the other institutions that existed. For instance, they would often show this thief and police scene where the thief was robbing something, and then the police would come and beat him up. But then midway during the scene, the roles would be flipped or switched rather. And this would make the masses realize that they are as much human as the thief, or vice versa. Now, when the theater of the oppressed came, it was an amalgamation of all these various forms and strands of theater that Bol practiced in all these years. And he came up with this book, which I mentioned earlier. Now, this book is not only a document, but it is a poetics. It is a drama treaty. And at its core is politics and activism, which Bol was a major advocate of. And he laid emphasis on praxis. He didn't mean to just read it, but he wanted to take it beyond the written word. And there are a few major elements that are a part of Bol's arsenal. One of them is the meutic method, where they are I'm sorry, just give me a minute. Yeah, so he took form of the meutic method, where whatever dialogues were spoken, they were not taken as a whole, but they were rather later speculated upon. He also used the joker and the facilitator. The joker or the facilitator was a major entity in Bol's theater of the oppressed. He was the one who would, as you later see, be a core element in the entire functioning of the drama or the improvised theater, which would be the spectator, the spectator becoming the spectator. And these performances were performed in, these plays were performed in non-theatrical spaces. The joker or the facilitator, what did he do? This is an image of Bol in one of his workshops, where he is being the facilitator. Now, the joker would introduce the drama. He would often stop at various junctures during the course of the drama, and he would ask them to get involved in the narrative. And he would use meutics, which is he would ask our audience to ask questions, to keep interrupting. He would invite audience reactions into the narrative, and continually form new narratives. So these are a few images. Now, this will also come up a little later in my slideshow as to why Indian, people are a part of the theater of the oppressed. And, this woman, as you see, is a spectator. And, here there's a performance going on in just about nowhere, in the middle of nowhere, rather, in a jungle or maybe some remote location. Now, in the theater of the oppressed, the spectator helps to rewrite the play while the actors are still playing their part. Okay, they substitute themselves for the actors in order to find a way out of the current situation. Since the spectator becomes the actor, Bol coined this term spect-actor, which is an amalgam of both the words spectator and actor. And with this, of course, the aim was to make the masses more aware, of their rights. Bol wanted the tenets of the theater of the oppressed to be shared worldwide. He didn't want to have an ownership of what we call as the Bol's arsenal. And thus Bol's heirs were born. It is a very poetic line to say, but you will see how the Bol's heirs were born, or who were the heirs. The two most prominent movements in the late 1990s or early 1990s, late 1980s are, from India and from Brazil. The Indian chapter, the Jan Sanskriti Center for the Theatre of the Oppressed, it was founded by Sanjoy Ganguly and in 1985, and the Brazilian in Rio de Janeiro. Okay. They, of course, made the use of Bol's arsenal, and which was at the core of their practice. And they tried to carry the tradition of this theatrical practice forward, and they were activist practitioners. Now, since they were carrying the tradition forward, they refer to themselves as Bols heirs. Now, Jan Sanskriti Center for the Theatre of the Oppressed is one of the first bodies in India which practices or which began practicing the theatre of the oppressed as at its core. And it has not really practiced any other form of theatre, but solely devoted itself to, reaching out to the masses, going to the remote locations in the villages, and making people aware of their rights and so on. It was conceptualized by Sanjoy Ganguly, as I mentioned earlier. It is operational in West Bengal since 1985, and it is the exponent of TO. TO is the short for Theatre of the Oppressed in India. Here's another scene from one of the plays. Jan Sanskriti has its main training and administrative centers at Badu, Madhyam Gram in South 24 Parganas. It has operation zones in North and South 24 Parganas, Murshidabad and Midnapur districts of West Bengal, and among other places. It has established its extension links in Bihar, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Maharashtra, New Delhi, Tripura, and these are only a few because there have been many more in the recent times. Now, these two, as you see, are very, different scenes visually that you don't normally see in a normal theatrical production. Now, what Ganguly does is he also, takes to the stage. He'll have a group of people invited into a setting, and then, he'll perform that, a certain play, which will be often taken up from their own lives, dealing with the social or the political aspects of their own lives. And, of course, later on, he will invite audience interactions, and he will often invite the audience members on the stage to enact the role of the oppressor or the oppressed, and thereby looking deep into the psyche of either of the two and providing solutions. With this practice, Ganguly, and often Ganguly himself plays the role of the Joker in most of his productions. Of course, you cannot see Ganguly in any of these pictures, but you will see soon enough. Now, Ganguly says that the aim of Jan Sanskriti Center for the Theatre of the Oppressed is to create a space in which the oppressed will have enormous scope for introspection and discovery of the self, and to facilitate a meeting between the individual and the perfection within himself. Now, of course, Indians have a different logic altogether when it comes to what one should do and shouldn't do. And Ganguly really truly works with indigenous people and tribal people who are the most oppressed of the lot. I'd like to take one example here. In one of his plays, Sarama, which I also talk about in my thesis, he says that it was not documented, or rather written or scripted the way it is being performed now. Over the years of performance, the play underwent a series of changes owing to the kind of reactions and stories that Ganguly's team had from the people where it was performed in the remote villages of West Bengal mostly. These are a few representational images. Now, this is how Ganguly, creates his acting area. If the acting area is in the middle of a village or maybe on a street, then it would just be a circle, which is like how we do in street theater or Nukkad Natak. So it will be just a circular area of performance, and they would use very basic and minimal props, usually lathis or bamboo sticks and dupattas or scarves and so on. And they don't really have much in terms of prop or much in terms of setting, but they make do with what they have. Now, as you see these triangular, tied up sticks, they often acted as huts. They would often act as police stations or shelter homes or whatever. I mean, they'll make do with what they have got, and they'll just use it to the best of their capacity and ability to narrate their tale. Now, like I say, he uses minimal props. The performances are often in remote locations. When I say remote locations, I mean in the rural areas, in the in the remote locations of the Sundarbans, or in the remote locations of Bihar, where people don't really get much of an what you call exposure, and where they are probably not even aware of their own rights. Now, Ganguly takes theater to such areas, and he makes these people realize what their own, rights are, and if or when they are being wronged by the ones in power. And here, there's a direct contact and communication with the common man, because the common man is the one for whom the play is performed. And the common man also becomes a spect actor. That is, you know how it is with underinformed people, or rather simple people of the rural, where if something is performed, they would often speak up that this is wrong. How you often see in Nautankis and various sorts of other forms of drama that take to the street. These people would directly comment on if something is wrong on the in the drama. So this is how the common man becomes directly involved with the play. Some of the productions by Jan Sanskriti have been Gair Panchali. This was one of their first productions, which is called The Song of the Village. Most of their productions are in Bengali, because that is where they are based. They have also translated and documented them. But like Bol, Ganguly doesn't have this idea of following the text as it is, but it keeps on changing and evolving and becoming, or rather choosing a form which is best suited to the place and the narrative or the story which it needs to be telling. Sonar Mein, again 1991, Amar Jekhane Dariye, Where We Stand 1993, Drishtikon or Perspective 2007, A Village Dream 2014, Bhalo Manush 2016. It was adapted from Brecht's The Good Person of Shezwan, which is a play from 1943. Khele Ghar. This is a really interesting play. I'll be sharing a slide shortly. And this is an adaptation of Ibsen's A Doll's House. Can you see the screen?
I think you should wind up now, because we have to close at 6 o'clock.
Yes,
so we may have no time for discussion, Rupam.
Yes, ma'am, just one more. So this is a list of, Ganguly documented most of his journey in the theatre of the oppressed in his Indian chapter through these two books, Jan Sanskriti, which is the Forum Theatre and Democracy in India, and also from Bol to Jan Sanskriti, Practice and Principles. And he also documented theatre in these two books, which I have shared here, Scripting Power and Where We Stand. Now, this is a short clip. I will not play this because it is an hour-long play. But if you, continue to move on later, much later into the production, you will see that, Ganguly will invite people from amongst this is in Bengali. So, you will continue to read the script, which is being said here, the captions rather, in order to make sense if you don't understand Bengali. And you will see for yourself as to how he uses, the common man, or how he brings them onto the space. Very, very common people who have nothing to do with drama or theater, but, they are just, normal people who are not involved in arts of any kind. And you will see that they have very potent responses to the problems that are posed in this play. And with this, I end my presentation. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this opportunity. And over to you, Maria.
Thank you so much, Rupam, for throwing such significant light upon the apparently obscure theatre of oppressed. Okay, so our chat box is full of praises for our speakers, and I think we shall take a few questions for the speakers. I hope you people are ready. Okay, so the first question is to Dr. Jasmeet Singh by Pragya Tiwari. She says that it was a wonderful presentation. And she says that her question is that, as you said, that each person is dependent on the situations they face and that eventually shape one's personality. Then does that mean that the concept of uniqueness and individuality is an illusion and we are all figures and not characters? Dr. Jasmeet?
Kindly, Maria, if you can repeat the question once again.
Yes, just a second. As you said that each person is dependent on the situations they face and that eventually shapes one's personality. Then does that mean that the concept of uniqueness and individuality is an illusion and we are all figures and not characters? She's basically asking a lot of questions clubbed into one.
This is a very good question asked by Pragya. In fact, it is the capitalist society as a whole who actually brings about this concept of individuality. Capitalism is a machine that creates discontent. It is a machine that creates individuality. Okay, it does not talk of a collective thing because capitalists know that collective response to a particular thing might disbalance them, bring about imbalance in society. So yes, we are all figures. In fact, we change according to situations. We react according to situations. Though capitalist does not want us to think so. In fact, last day only I was watching the web series called The Family Man 2, where we find a CEO of a company advising Manoj Bajpayee that you should not be a minimum average man. So he is talking about the individual's ability to succeed, the individual's ability to move ahead. But in society is not changed by an individual. And individuality is something that changes with specific situations, definitely.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Okay, so the next question is also from Pragya. She says that the presentation of Rohit Yadav was very amazing, and her question is that why the Natya Shastra is considered an ancient thing. What about its contemporary relevance? Why is there no commentary on Natya Shastra apart from Abhinav Gupta? And what reasons are there apart from colonization? And how can we resolve this issue? Rohit?
Well, it's an ancient text, so that's why it's called an ancient text. I don't think that there's not a lot of work being done on Natya Shastra. Natya Shastra has been taken very seriously, and after the origin of Theatre of Roots, which Mr. Suresh Awasthi stressed upon, there's a lot of research which has been done, and even I came across few good works in National School of Drama also. Natya, because of its own load of regulations and discipline, it can at times doesn't expose to social issues which can be done in other forms of or ways, or the way Brecht gives you that openness to come and speak whatever you want. So that is something which I think is a problem over there.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so we have another question for Dr. Jasmeet Singh from Siddharth Singh. He says that it was a good presentation, but he doesn't agree about the way you have explained dialectics with reference to the French Revolution. So would you like to make a short comment? No, so he would like to make a short comment if he's provided the time to speak. So what do you have to say?
We would like to hear Siddharth. We would like to know why he says so.
Can we unmute him? Can the host, the co-host and the host, please unmute him?
Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, Siddharth.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
I am Siddharth Singh. I'm Siddharth Singh, Associate Professor in Jain PG College.
Yes,
actually, when you explain dialectics with special reference to Marxism, so my observation is that when we talk about thesis and antithesis is always borrowed out and from the thesis. And as far as aristocracy and the middle classes are concerned, the middle class was not born out of from the aristocracy. It grew because of the economical France and England, all these nations flourished. And this dialectics, the matter of dialectics is actually goes back to the Hebraic system. If we read the Genesis, the God and Saturn, Saturn is actually creating a dialectic. He is an antithesis. So he must be opposite as well as he must be born out from or of the root, that root. So Adam is not antithesis, but Saturn is antithesis. Here, middle class is not antithesis actually in the term of Marxism. This is what is my observation, because it was not born out of aristocracy. So that was all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. This was a new thing that I came across. Actually, I came across this example of French Revolution when I was doing my thesis from a library book. I would like to refer that book also. The name of the book is with me. The name of the book was Brecht in Practice, written by David Barnett, and it's a Bloomsbury publication. So this is the source from which this example was actually taken. So I take your point. I would rather like to work on it also. It's a good enlightening point that you make. But this was the source that I had actually taken the point from. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, both of you. Okay, so the last question, which is for Rupam Mishra, is from Vishakha Sen. She says that how is the theatre of oppressed and Jana Sanskriti different from early third theatre? Quite insightful presentation.
They are completely different in their practice and in the way they, I would especially talk about the theatre of the oppressed and Jan Sanskriti when I say this. The way Bol had initially decided to bring forth people into center stage, and there are two common factors in both. But how this is different is the audience members which are seated there, who are not aware of how this plot is going to unfold. They are allowed to be a part of the narrative. They are allowed to make comments on it, and often brought onto the stage, and they become the actors, which is how the term spectators emerged, and how Bol intended it to be known. So this is one of the major factors in the basis which differentiates the two. I hope that was clear, Vishakha.
Okay, so thank you so much to all the three speakers for so patiently answering all the queries. Okay, so now we will stop with the question.
Maria, I would like to stop you. Dr. Pava would like to say something at this juncture.
Yes, I'm just about to invite ma'am. Yes, okay. Or should I stop here?
Thank you, Maria.
Yes, ma'am.
And I just will very quickly congratulate all the three presenters. And of course, it's a personal pleasure and pride for all of us at the Department of English and Modern European Languages to see you all bloom with such intellectual prowess. Bravo to that. I very quickly they're not questions to all the three presenters, very quick observations, rather comments. Jasmeet, if I may say so, now you're our esteemed colleague, Dr. Jasmeet Singh. I would have been happier had you had, since you were already exploring and since you're actually located in West Bengal and Noihati, about Fritz Benowitz productions in Kolkata, of course, then Calcutta in 1980, which was done under the CRT, which is actually the Calcutta Repertory Theatre Company. And this is how actually Brecht comes to India. So, when you are talking about him, and everything else, of course, was extremely comprehensive, and congratulations for that. I thought I will just add in, because in case you want to share your work with other in other colleges and other platforms, and also because Benowitz is instrumental in getting, and the production that actually was done by CRT was, Galileo Gibbon, which was actually the life of Galileo done in Bengali. And also, Benowitz wanted to inscribe an ideology in terms of the theatrical representations and politicization of art. And I also would want you to explore about the short scene, what Brecht actually called the Strabenzien, which is what he did for the street theater. And Rohit, I am, of course, extremely delighted. I mean, the sweep with which you have surveyed the development of modern Indian theater definitely deserves a special mention, and how you have traced the post-independence Indian theater in all aspects of the colonial, the rise of the Parsi theater, the commercialization, and so on and so forth. I would, in fact, suggest humbly that the cultural palimpsest that you have spoken about, but needs to be more concretized rather than it being diffused, and also how the post-independence theater is now a site of celebration between the Western and Indian traditions. And talking of Suresh Avasthi's Theatre of Roots movement, you must also be aware that while he did those very, very seminal and path-breaking seminars in 1961 and the Round Table in 1971, is primarily highly contestable today, the Theatre of Roots movement, and also the element of the intercultural theatre needs to be factored in, because Rustam Barucha of the Department of Aesthetics at JNU has contested that, because this is a different kind of cultural piracy that's happening and what we need to do about it. So we don't, I mean, it's up to you which positionality you take, but you need to be be reading into that. And Rupam, it was again something that Augusta Boal taking up the Theatre of the Oppressed, which I think would be Brecht, of course, and Indian theatre, of course, is reasonably well known to our students, but this was a path-breaking area that you have taken up, and I must congratulate you for that. But I also thought that I will make a humble submission that the one omission that was there in your presentation was the influence that's Paulo Freire, whose theatre, the pedagogy of the oppressed is a springboard, in fact, the watering hole to which Augusta Boal goes into. And I must, and that's what I just pointed out in Dr. Jasmeet's presentation, that was, that little void that I found. I think you did brilliantly bring in the practice of Boal, the interpenetration of Boal's Theatre of the Oppressed in the remote villages of Sundarbans. And I'll be happy to share that my seminar director, the Professor Doris Summer, has collaborated with these groups in West Bengal. So this is how, theatre reaches out, and also because there is so much. So I have reservations about Rohit. I addressed to you about the comment about Erin B. Me talking about hybridization. Then what about Richard Schechner carrying back Aram Leela and Peter Brooks performing a Mahabharat? So why should this term, I have objections to Erin B.'s statement about hybridizations. It is a cultural osmosis, and it cannot be denied, because, and in fact, it's Fritz Benowitz coming to India that he comes into touch with Vijaya Mehta, who's invited by the then GDR government to go and perform Abhigyan Shakuntalam. And of course, we all know how Goethe was involved in and so much enamored by Kalidas. So as young scholars, I think this is amazing performance, and as seen you all through our own portals, it's a personal pride, and I'm sure Professor Unial shares that sentiment with me and my other esteemed colleagues. That well done. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, I do agree with you on the context of Rustam Baruch and how he contradicts with Suresh Avasthi's point. So I do agree. And on Erin B. Mee's point also, like she has claimed it, and in that context, I do disagree that that's not the appropriate way to label Indian theatre the way it's been going on and progressing. So I do agree on that. Thank you, ma'am, for those comments. And I would like to thank Ranu, ma'am, for giving this opportunity to speak up. Yesterday, I was nervous when Ranu, ma'am, was taking a demo, and then she said that do rehearsals. And today, Meenakshi, ma'am, is here, and David sir was also here. So I was a bit more nervous, So thank you, ma'am, for this opportunity.
Can I also quickly add one comment, ma'am? I did add Paulo Freire, but I so forgot to mention his name in the flow. I took his name when I talked about the image theater, which Boal devised in.
Pedagogy of the oppressed is an important.
Ma'am. I totally missed reading that out. Thank you for pointing out.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such enlightful observations. Okay, so we will stop with the question answer session now. It was a thoroughly engaging and enthralling session. All thanks to our speakers and also our attentive listeners. We highly appreciate your patience. I would now like to invite our professor, Dr. Meenakshi Pawar, to please say a few words of encouragement for the speakers and with a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Maria. I think I've done that, jumped the wagon. I've done it already before your invitation, so my apologies for that. But definitely, it's indeed my pleasure and privilege to propose the vote of thanks for this amazing webinar that was conducted under the aegis of the Department of English and Modern European Languages, University of Lucknow, and under the absolute dynamic leadership and generosity of Professor Ranu Uniyal for having provided a platform like the Rhetorica Quarterly to our young, aspiring, visionary scholars. And that's primarily because of an extremely brilliant leadership for which she is now being associated with, because this gives a platform for nurturing our young aspiring scholars, not just to express their ideas on digital platform, but also to hone their skills, which will endow them greater employability in the arena of the job market, very much and truly in sync with the new education policy 2020. Heartiest congratulations to all the speakers once again, and I take this opportunity to congratulate each one of you, Dr. Jasmeet, Rohit Yadav, and Rupa Mishra, for brilliant, absolutely comprehensive and engaging presentations, which were definitely worth commending because you all kept to time. And I think that also calls for good scholarship to respect time and not spill over. So well done to all of you. And I take this opportunity to thank my esteemed colleagues from our Department of English and Modern European Languages, as well as from our associated colleges who have taken time out from their fiercely busy schedules to encourage our young scholars this evening. And my heartfelt thanks to all the students who have been avid listeners, and I'm sure they have been deeply enriched by this immersion. I truly appreciate and in appreciation and gratitude to Ms. Maria Khan for being a competent MC and for steering the program with such aplomb. Thank you.